The 1990s, an era when superhero comics were, this. For better or for worse, they were like this. Look, I like a lot of superhero comics from the 90s. In fact, several of my favorite characters come from this era, Sleepwalker, Darkhawk, etc. But even I can't deny that a lot of 90s comics took some certain tropes and went way, way too hard into them. And the character we're going to be talking about today is one of the pinnacle examples of that. This is Adam X, otherwise known by his superhero codename X-Treme, spelled as X-Treme? I don't know, it's kind of hard to space out loud, but you get what I mean. His name is X-Treme, and that tells you a lot about the character right away. X-Treme is the most edgy emo 90s man to ever exist. He has long, flowing golden hair and a tiny little goatee, and his costume is covered in spikes and knives, and he wears a backwards baseball cap, and he's also the brother of Cyclops. Bet you weren't expecting that last part, huh? Yes, Cyclops has a brother. Well, actually, he has a couple of brothers, but this one, the half-brother who's an alien and also part bird, is definitely the least known. Yes, I said part bird. There's a lot to go over here. And if you're not confused enough to be intrigued already, Adam X also has the most 90s edgy superpower that I've ever seen on the page. I'm not going to tell you what that is right now. I'm shamelessly going to make this an intro hook. You have to watch the video to find out what the power is, but I guarantee you that you won't be disappointed. And if all that wasn't enough intro promises, X-Treme also has genuinely compelling character moments and a really interesting production history that comes to a satisfying conclusion. It's not all 90s edge today. We're going to get to a point that's going to make you happy. Yeah, that's maybe the biggest promise of all of them, considering what this guy looks like. Alright, with that, I've spent enough time making promises about this character. Let's go ahead and get to paying them off. Without further ado, let's talk about X-Treme, who is a lot. Let's just go. Adam X first debuted in a 1993 annual issue of X-Force, which is extremely guessable if you know a lot about X-Men lore. For those of you who don't, X-Force, especially early 90s X-Force, is like the definitive gritty, edgy mutant team. So this being the comic to debut X-Treme makes perfect sense. This comic was written by a guy named Fabian Nicieza, a name that, again, established X-Men fans are probably familiar with. But regardless of whether you've heard the name before or not, keep it in your head, because Nicieza is going to be very important to the story of this character. Adam's arc in his debut issue is pretty straightforward. It's a very stock standard X-Men sphere plotline. He is not the main villain of the issue. Instead, he is a bounty hunter working for the real main villain, an anti-mutant scientist named Martin Strong. Strong, like many other X-villains, has a master plan to kidnap and forcibly depower any mutants that he can get his hands on, and Adam's job is to kidnap and bring mutants back to his lab. However, Adam is a mutant himself, and not one who is physically disfigured or hates his powers, so that raises the question of why is he working for an anti-mutant guy? That is because X-Treme is an amnesiac, at least, kind of. It's not immediately clear from this issue how much of his past Adam actually remembers, which is not a problem in this comic. This is very clearly intended to be the beginning of Adam's arc, and his origins are not yet revealed. But still, in this comic alone, we know very little about him. The most important thing we learn about Adam right from the beginning is that despite his mostly human appearance, he is an alien. He was raised far off in space on a small farming planet, but at the same time was also trained to be some sort of incredibly deadly warrior. That is really all that the readers are told because at the time, it is all that Adam himself knows. Martin Strong, however, claims to know more about Adam's past, and that's kind of what he's holding over him to keep his loyalty. With backstory established, at least as much as we're going to get for now, a classic superhero fight and then team-up trope happens. Adam is hunting down a mutant, runs into the mutant defending X-Force, and then realizes he's probably on the wrong side and joins the heroes to go take down Strong himself. The team-up works, the villain is defeated, and then, to the surprise of absolutely nobody listening, X-Treme is given an invitation to join X-Force, which he does not accept because he's the most emo 90s man to ever exist. In response to the offer, Adam says that while he wants to belong to a family again, he has to find out more about himself before he feels like he can do that, which is fair, I guess. And then the final page of the issue is one of the least subtle scenes that I have ever seen in any comic book ever. A flyer dramatically blows up to Adam's leg. He picks it up, reads the words, "Do you wish to find a place where you could just fit in?" and then grunts, stabs it into a tree with one of his knives, and walks away into the night. Isn't this guy cool as hell? Cheesy as this introductory issue might be, I will admit that it does give a very accurate impression of Adam as a character immediately. I've said it already, and not for the last time in this video, I'll say it again, he's the most emo edgies 90s man to ever exist. Lore-wise, he's a sad alien mutant guy, the mystery of his origin has been established, and it is pretty clear that we're at least going to get more answers provided in the coming comics. But before I move on to X-Treme's second appearance, there is one very important thing we need to go over from this issue, which is, as I promised in the intro, Adam X's absolutely wild superpowers. I'll be very upfront. This is the reason the character is worth talking about. His story is surprisingly interesting, and the rest of the video will have good stuff, but if he did not have the powers he did, you'll see what I mean. The mutant ability possessed by Adam X is referred to in the comics themselves as hemopyrokinesis. To anyone listening who knows a little bit of Latin, you're probably already very confused. Before I actually talk about what this power does, let me break down that name chunk by chunk, because that is the funniest way that I can possibly do it. We'll start from the end, kinesis. Literally, kinesis means movement or motion, but in comic book terms, it usually means control. Telekinesis, controlling things with your mind, hydrokinesis, controlling water, or in this case, pyrokinesis, pyro being fire. So most of the name, pyrokinesis, fire control. That is not weird, that's a power lots of characters have. But then we add the first third on there, hemo. Hemo means blood. So this name translates directly to blood fire control. What the hell does that mean? Well, let me tell you, X-Treme's power is that he can set people's blood on fire. He cannot control fire otherwise, he's not a firebender. He also cannot control blood otherwise, he's not a bloodbender. Specifically, he can set blood on fire from a distance. You see what I mean about this being the most 90s power ever written? And we're not even done. There's multiple layers to this, each of which just makes the thing more ridiculous. The first is actually more of a weakness or limitation to X-Treme's abilities. To ignite blood, it has to be heavily oxygenated. In more simple terms, he can only ignite blood that's been exposed to air, which means he has to make people bleed first. This is why he carries bladed weapons. Actually, he doesn't even carry them. He has cybernetic blades installed in his arms like Wolverine because we needed to make this even edgier. And once he cuts his opponent and makes them bleed, then he ignites their bloodstream and the fire travels all the way there, making them collapse in burning pain. You know the very iconic fight between Iron Man and Thanos in the MCU where Thanos says all that for a drop of blood? Imagine if Thanos said that very iconic and intimidating and ominous line, and then Tony looked up at him and was like, "And that's all I needed," and then Thanos screamed and exploded as all of his blood caught on fire. Yeah, that is Adam X's entire thing. And as if that was not already enough, Adam can also use this blood ignition power on himself. This alone is not that weird, he has blood like most other beings, but the weird part is that when he uses the power on himself, it produces an entirely different effect for some reason. When Adam ignites his own blood, instead of immediately killing him or at the very least making him pass out, it gives him super speed. Because blood on fire make you go faster, I guess. Sure, whatever, at this point I don't care. In reality, I think that this half of his power is more of a pun than anything else, because Adam X is a very impulsive, reckless man, or as you would say in a more idiomatic way, hot-blooded. So he can make his blood hot to make himself go faster and be even more impulsive. I hate that that's clever, but I have to admit it kind of is. So to recap this nonsensical set of abilities, by making his opponent bleed in any way, Adam can then just instantaneously set their entire bloodstream on fire, causing them a lot of pain or potentially straight up killing them, unless he uses the power on himself, in which case it makes him go faster. So he's basically a JoJo's Bizarre Adventure character, like that's the level of specificity we're working with. So what do you do with this absolutely insane power? Let's get back to talking about Adam's actual comic storyline. His first appearance did set up a big, if vague, mystery about his alien origins, and readers would not have to wait too long for that to be followed up on. At least in theory. Technically, Adam X's next appearance is in X-Force issue 29, only 2 months after his debut. But the reason I say technically is that he's only on the last page of this comic, and it is just a teaser set up for the next issue. So really, his next appearance is X-Force issue 30. This is a promising appearance though, because it's in the same series that he debuted in, also written by Fabian Nicieza, so you would expect that this would contain the next chapter of Adam X lore. You would expect that, and you'd be wrong. In this comic, both X-Force member Shatterstar and Adam have been captured by the Jigsaw-esque mastermind Arcade and forced to fight to the death in one of the villain's elaborate murder traps. And then, of course, they end up teaming up with each other instead and taking down the villain. Which you'll note is almost shot for shot the exact same thing that happened in Adam's first appearance. X-Treme is now 2 for 2 in fight and then team up tropes. And how is his personal mystery advanced at all during this issue? It isn't. Not even a tiny little bit. There is no more information about Adam's history provided to the readers in the slightest in X-Force 29 and 30. The only thing that we learn, which barely even counts as information, is that Arcade was hired to kill Adam by someone else, but the name of that grander villain is never revealed. Arcade has the name on a piece of paper, but then Adam is going to murder him, so Arcade eats the paper instead so that Adam has to leave him alive if he wants to find out that name. And then Shatterstar just blows up Arcade, who was actually a robot the whole time anyway, and so that information is never revealed. If nothing else though, this one panel is pretty funny, so at least there is that. So with nothing else to say here, I can move on to Adam's next appearance, which is in X-Men Volume 2, number 38, also written by Fabian Nicieza. You're starting to get why I told you that name was important. Adam is a Nicieza creation, and this man is the one guy driving the character's story forward across multiple different comics at this point. So now that we've jumped to an entirely separate series, is this the point where we are finally going to get an advancement on the storyline of Adam X? And the answer is, kinda. There's a lot of kinda here. I promise we are going to arrive at something that is genuinely a satisfying conclusion, but you're gonna have to bear with me for several more appearances before we get there. X-Treme's appearance in X-Men Volume 38 is once again a singular page. It is literally just an interlude. It says interlude right at the top there, and below that is a 5-panel interaction where Adam is trying to gain information on his past by talking to a guy in a maximum security prison. That guy directs Adam to the name Charles Xavier. And then this goes nowhere. There is a reason why it goes nowhere that I'll get to shortly, but yeah, you can kind of just forget that this page happened because it's not going to matter in any capacity. But then, the streak of nothing appearances is broken in X-Men 39. Adam X is actually a main character in this issue, and I can't believe these words are about to come out of my mouth. This Adam X comic is genuinely really good. I know, I'm stunned too. In this book, Adam is hitchhiking across the Canadian wilderness, presumably trying to get to New York and Charles Xavier, though the prison he was just in last issue was in New Mexico, so I'm not sure how he got to Canada. Whatever, it's not really important, I'm not gonna worry about it. While waiting for a car, he sees a plane crash in the nearby woods. That plane was a small one piloted by the elderly Philip Summers, grandfather of Scott Summers, Cyclops. Philip was a pilot during World War II and continued flying as a hobby into his old age, but eventually that age caught up with him, leading to his eyesight going, which caused the crash. Adam sprinted to the location and was fast enough to pull Philip from the wreckage, but the danger was not nearly over, as while the pair of them were alive, they were now lost in the frozen wilds of the Yukon. Adam builds a makeshift sled and begins pulling Philip to the nearest hospital, but that's not exactly close, and the process does take several days. Over the journey, though, the two end up bonding over a shared love of flight and space. Adam openly tells Philip that he is an alien, something that the elderly man is very open to because he knows that his grandkids are X-Men, so this is relatively par for the course. Still, he's fascinated by Adam's stories, as he's always wanted to fly higher than he ever was able to in his own plane and go and see the stars for himself. This friendship culminates in an incredibly emotional scene in which Philip is about to succumb to the cold and perish, and in his final moments tells Adam, quote, "If I am going to die tonight, son, and it can't be in the arms of my wife, then nothing would make more sense to me than passing on in the company of someone who's flown where I've only dreamed of going." These would be fitting final words, but they don't have to be, as in a last moment of desperation, Adam takes out a knife, makes small cuts on Philip's hands, and then uses his hemopyrokinesis at a lighter, controlled level, not causing a full ignition, but conveying just enough heat to warm the old man from within and keep him alive in the snow. This is an incredibly touching moment and a great application of the power, one that not only the readers had never seen before, but Adam himself had never used. The comic makes a point to say that he had never used his abilities to warm or to heal, and that he'd always used them as a weapon. So this is a character moment for Adam too, and a turning point in his arc. And even then, somehow the comic keeps getting better from here. Adam does manage to get Philip to a hospital, injured but alive, and is quickly joined by Cyclops and Jean Grey, come to make sure Scott's grandfather is doing all right. Now, Adam had never met the X-Men before this, he had only met X-Force, but thanks to Jean's telepathy, she is able to tell that Adam is the one who saved Philip, and also that he too is a mutant. Realizing that Jean is telepathic, Adam then asks her for a favor, and Jean links the minds of Adam and the man that he saved, allowing Philip Summers to experience some of Adam's own memories of spaceflight, giving the old man the experience of traveling the stars that he had always wanted. This comic rules. I was genuinely amazed. When I was researching for this video, I was not expecting to have genuine emotional feelings from an Adam X book, but Fabian Nicieza is a good writer, and you can really tell from this issue. This is amazing. Now, the comic does end almost immediately after that scene. Adam leaves the hospital and does not provide us any more lore yet, but we're clearly getting there. We know he's looking for Professor X, he's now interacted with a couple of the X-Men, all the bones of the storyline are there, and he's even getting more of a character arc, so maybe he's going to be less of a sad, edgy emo man as he learns about friendship and family and eventually joins the X-Men. And then Fabian Nicieza got fired from the X-Men comics. Oh no! Yeah, remember how I said there was a reason that the interlude page didn't really go anywhere? This is the reason. Nicieza would get into a dispute with editorial over the plot lines for the book just a couple of issues later and was kicked off at issue 45. Technically, he did write one more book with Adam X in it, but it was literally just a one-panel cameo, not relevant to his plotline at all, and he was not able to return to that plotline before getting fired. Since Nicieza had been the only person to write Adam X up to that point, no one else really cared to finish the storyline in his stead, so that plot just got entirely dropped. But all hope was not lost, because very importantly, Fabian Nicieza was not fired from Marvel, he was only fired from X-Men, and he had other books that he could use to continue his arcs. Enter the Captain Marvel miniseries from 1995. Not a mutant or X-Men related book at all, but it was a book about space and aliens. And Adam's whole mystery was about space and aliens, so this is perfect. We can just finish the storyline here. Now, Adam was not a main character in this book by any means. He got 2 issues, but it is the exact same situation as his 2-issue appearance the previous time. He's in 1 issue as a final page teaser, and then he's actually a main character in the next one. So for practical purposes, we're really just talking about Captain Marvel issue 3. The Captain Marvel in this comic is Genis-Vell, the son of Mar-Vell, the original Captain Marvel, though technically Genis-Vell was going by the codename Legacy at the time, not Captain Marvel for anyone who wants to be pedantic at me. Now, based on precedent of Adam X storylines, can you take a wild guess as to what the plot of this issue is? Put your guesses in the comments if you want, it's not a particularly hard guess. The plotline is that Captain Marvel hits X-Treme a lot, and then they team up, of course. But I'm going to allow it this time because they are being self-aware about it. How self-aware, you might ask? Well, that specific phrasing that I just used is literally on the cover of the comic. It says verbatim, Captain Marvel hits X-Treme a lot, and then they team up, of course. This is one of the funniest comic book covers I've ever seen. At this point, Nicieza is just leaning right into the bit. Reading this comic, you can kind of tell that he's a little bit annoyed. He's justifiably angry that he didn't get to finish the Adam X plotline in X-Men, so he's just gonna do it by any means necessary, and the details can be Marvel's problem. In this book, Adam has gotten mind-controlled by an alien villain named Eric the Red, and Eric has sent him as a bounty hunter once again to go kill Genis-Vell. Unfortunately, this ends up backfiring because of the specific nature of Genis-Vell's current abilities. During this time, Genis was wielding weapons known as the Nega Bands, and when these items were slammed together, they could do a few things, but one possible option was that they would teleport the wearer to a parallel dimension known as the Negative Zone. At one point while Genis and Adam are grappling, this teleportation is activated, sending both of them away, and being on a different plane of existence from Eric the Red evidently broke Adam's hypnosis. And then, well, you know exactly how the story goes because you saw the cover. They hit each other a lot and then team up. When the heroes then went to confront Eric the Red, Eric attempts to get Adam on his side more genuinely by just kind of telling him everything about his true origin, and therefore we get the history of Adam X, or at least most of it, in kind of just a big 3-page backstory dump, because that was what was needed to finish the arc, I guess. To explain how all of this backstory works, I need to briefly touch on an alien species named the Shi'ar. The Shi'ar are humanoids with bird-like elements who control a massive interstellar empire, one of the biggest in the entire Marvel Universe. Despite their huge scale, though, the Shi'ar are X-Men characters like 95% of the time. Occasionally they will matter to other cosmic storylines or individual characters like Darkhawk, but usually when you see the Shi'ar on the page, it's because there are mutants from Earth involved. The most important leader of the Shi'ar Imperium is Empress Lilandra, who is also a frequent love interest of Charles Xavier. Yes, Professor X has an alien bird girlfriend, though that's not particularly important to this storyline, I just wanted to bring it up. Lilandra is not the first leader of the Shi'ar though, nowhere near it, and before her, the Empire was led by Magister Deken, who was driven insane and dethroned. Despite him being overthrown though, he still had loyalists, and Eric the Red was one of these. In his big exposition speech, Eric the Red reveals that Adam was part of D'Ken's loyalists as well, and was specifically created as a genetic hybrid made to rule the Shi'ar Empire after D'Ken's passing. He was part Shi'ar and part human mutant. This is where his name comes from. He was called Adam because he was the first man of this new hybrid species. The human who provided DNA samples for Adam's creation is not revealed here quite yet, but we do know that his Shi'ar half comes from Magister D'Ken directly. Adam is D'Ken's son, making him the long-lost prince of the dethroned Shi'ar Empire. This is a lot to process, but it is at the very least a bunch of solid answers onto where Adam X's arc was supposed to go. Until you start thinking about it for a couple minutes, at which point you realize this raises maybe more questions than it answers, but we're not going to get any answers quite yet, because even though Eric the Red tries to recruit X-Treme back into the fold, X-Treme denies this, uses his blood ignition power to fry Eric the Red from the inside out, and then the spaceship crashes, and no more answers are provided. But hey, Fabian Nicieza has succeeded in continuing this storyline a little bit. Adam X is clearly one of his favorite characters, and he is very committed to finishing this arc out. They kicked him off of X-Men, he progressed it in Captain Marvel. Now that he's done more in Captain Marvel, what is the next step? Leaving the company and not writing at Marvel for several years. So this is kind of just where Adam X was left for a while. The story of this character is not over, thankfully, but yeah, this is an unsatisfying point to take a bit of a break on. At the very least, we do know what Adam is. He's an exiled alien prince. We don't really know, how he got to Earth, or where exactly he came from, or how any of this actually makes sense on a technical level, but we know what he is, and that is something. Though none of his next several appearances will use that as a plot point, even a tiny little bit at all. X-Treme's next 4 appearances are in an X-Men and Avengers crossover called Utopia, one of many similar plot lines in which the government is trying to pass anti-mutant legislation, leading to a lot of general unrest and rioting. Adam gets a little bit more than a cameo in these, at least, but not by much. He appears a couple of times as a member of a small mutant group that just keeps rioting over and over, really only as characters to get arrested. His characterization has reverted back to angry, edgy, emo 90s man, and I feel pretty confident that he was only picked as somebody who could riot and get arrested without having a lot of narrative context. So yes, you're hearing that right. After Nicieza fought so hard across 3 different comics to try and give this guy an actual character arc, his next several appearances are just reduced to him getting oppressed for being a mutant, and that's the end of it. And then his next 2 appearances after that are him getting oppressed for being an alien, and that's the end of it. These 2 are in the Sword comic from 2009, which is about the government trying to kick all of the aliens off of the planet. Now, I don't want to complain about this series too much because it is quite good. It's also by Kieran Gillen, who's one of my favorite writers, and he is also the first guy to use the term hemopyrokinesis for Adam's abilities. He'd been using the same set of powers since the 90s, but this was the first time we actually got a name for it. There is one lore development for Adam during this time, but it's more of a fun fact than anything else. We do get his confirmed last name. This is not a big reveal, there's just a couple of comics which do refer to him as Adam Naramani, after his father, D'Ken Naramani. I'm kinda surprised that he would be willing to use his father's name, given that he was an evil space emperor guy, but whatever, this is canon going forward. By now, you're probably getting the idea that the next few decades of Adam's history is just being used in random cameos. And I can't say that that is unfair. He's a superhero who wears a backwards baseball cap and sets people's blood on fire. I understand why that's a fun oddity for writers to reference, but he never gets any more development beyond that for quite some time. His next cameo is at least worth giving a little bit more time to, though, because it uses that power in a way that is clever and also really, really funny because it involves the Juggernaut. This was in an X-Men issue that was a tie-in to the Fear Itself event, in which a bunch of magical Asgardian hammers fell to Earth and corrupted anybody who touched them into these evil, magically empowered monstrosities. Juggernaut got one of these, becoming even more magically empowered than he usually is, and that was a big problem. This mega juggernaut then begins an unstoppable death march, and much of the issue is a montage of the X-Men trying and failing with plan after plan after plan to stop him. Plan number 24 involves deploying Adam X, and I'm just going to read you the caption boxes because they tell it better than I could. Hemopyrokinetic Adam X deployed in attempt to incapacitate Juggernaut by igniting blood. Result: blood ignition a success, but worse than ineffective. For 15 minutes, Unstoppable Juggernaut is rendered an unstoppable Juggernaut that ignites anything it touches. This is a good lesson to learn. Do not use fire on Juggernaut, it is just going to cause a much larger problem. This comic was also written by Kieran Gillen, by the way. I guess he likes Adam since this was the second reference in as many years. Now, we are getting pretty close to that satisfying conclusion that I promised a while ago, but there is one more Adam X appearance worth noting before then. Actually, a very frustrating one for me because it takes so much context. I'm just gonna try to get through it quickly. This is Mojo. He's an X-Men villain from an alternate dimension called Mojo World, which is run on reality TV and entertainment. That is the core of everything in their society. Mojo is the guy who produces the best entertainment, so he is by extension the ruler of the dimension. At some point off-screen in the years following his previous cameo, Adam X went to Mojo World and got trapped there because he was really good at being a live streamer. He has a show called Adam X's Hot Seat, and it did so well that Mojo basically kidnapped him and forced him to just stream non-stop. We get to see exactly one episode of the Hot Seat because of... Actually, hang on, let me say this first. YouTube Content Guidelines and Moderation Team, this is fictional. I'm talking about a fictional X-Men comic, and none of this is real. Okay, we get to see one episode of the show because Adam shoots a woman live on stream. This was actually an act of mercy, though, amazingly, because this was during the Krakoa era of mutant kind, which was a time in which any mutant that died could be immediately resurrected and basically just go on living like nothing happened. So the reason Adam X was willing to shoot this woman was not because he suddenly had a heel turn and became evil and edgy and emo again. She wanted to be shot so that she could escape Mojo World and be revived back on Krakoa. It would seem that Adam himself got rescued from Mojo World too, as he does cameo in the backgrounds of a couple other X-Men comics after this, but none of those really matter, which means that now we have finally reached the satisfying conclusion. Adam X has been a weird, jokey 90s reference background character for multiple decades at this point, but in 2021, he got an origin comic. Like a starring role Adam X the X-Treme origin story. This was in issues 1 and 2, yeah, it's not even a one-shot, it was 2 issues, of X-Men Legends, which was an anthology series doing flashback storylines to previous eras of the X-Men. These stories were canon though, they were just the untold tales that fit in between the other ones. Now, some of you might be wondering why this happened. Why would Marvel bother doing an Adam X origin story nearly 30 years after the character's debut, let alone lead the X-Men Legends series with this storyline out of all of them? And there is one reason for that. One extremely good reason, because these 2 comics were written by Fabian Nicieza. That's right. 30 years after creating Adam X and not being able to finish the story, Marvel let Nicieza return and tell the entire thing in full. He had regained his standing with Marvel many years before. He's done a ton of books, especially mutant things, in recent years, but this is just awesome. Like I said, it's a satisfying conclusion. I was able to make good on that promise because Nicieza himself gets to finish the story. This comic picks up right where Captain Marvel left off, immediately after Adam found out his true history, and it gives us a bunch of flashback scenes that fill in the gaps in that original storyline. Way back in Adam's childhood, when he was still being developed in his weird genetic engineering pod, the lab he was contained in was destroyed, and one of the Emperor's guards took the young child and fled to a faraway planet to keep him safe. This planet was named, oh boy, Chari-Shara. Yeah, I'm just gonna go with that. That sounds right enough. Chari-Shara was a planet of farmers, but also, more specifically, a planet of exiles. Those who failed the Imperium as warriors were sent here to live out their days in shame, where they could no longer live in the heat of battle. It was a fitting punishment for their culture, but it also meant that the young Adam was surrounded by very skilled fighters who could train him. He led a good life for a while, but one day his mutant blood ignition powers developed, and lacking the ability to control them at first, he caused a lot of pain to his community and ended up fleeing to Earth so that he could try and figure out where he came from on the other side of his genetic lineage. So now we are back to the old question: who is Adam's mother? We know who his father is. It was the previous emperor of the Shi'ar Imperium, Emperor Deken. His mother then, well, I kind of spoiled who it was right in the intro of the video because it was such a good introductory hook that I sort of had to. Adam Narimani's genetic mother is Catherine Summers, mom of X-Men, Cyclops, and Havoc, which makes Adam X another Summers brother. Possibly the third, or the fourth, or the fifth, depending on what metrics you're using. The Summers family tree is bad. Let me try and break down at least a tiny bit of that context for you, beginning with why Catherine Summers was in space doing things with the Shi'ar in the first place. When Cyclops and Havoc were kids, both of their parents were kidnapped by the Shi'ar under Magister Deken and taken into space, presumably for use in these genetic experiments. This incident actually led to the birth of two more Summers kids, the first of them being Gabriel Summers, who grew up to be the mutant Vulcan. Catherine was already pregnant with Gabriel by the time that she was kidnapped, and while she would end up getting killed by Deken, her unborn child would survive and would spend a little bit of time as a Shi'ar agent before escaping and meeting up with other mutants on Earth. Around the same time that this was going on, Cyclops' father, Christopher Summers, escaped the Shi'ar independently after trying and failing to save his wife, at which point he became a space pirate named Corsair. Yeah, Cyclops' dad is a space pirate. That's a whole other thing. So now neither parent is in the hold of the Shi'ar anymore. Catherine is dead and Christopher has gone out to do space pirate things. But it would later be revealed that Emperor Deken kept DNA samples from Catherine, and those were what was used in the creation of his prime experiment, Adam X. So yeah, Cyclops and Havoc have a half-bird alien half-brother, and this does seem to be the original intent of Nicieza's storyline. I can't say for sure whether this is exactly how he wanted it to play out back in the 90s, but I can say that Adam's Shi'ar lineage was hinted at in his original appearances, so this is at the very least consistent with that, and so I'm going to assume it is the same intended arc. The family ends up reuniting when Corsair is hired to hunt down and kill Adam by the Shi'ar Empire again, though importantly by Empress Lilandra, not the same empire that kidnapped him previously. This was part of an operation to hunt down and eliminate the exiled prince out of fear that he would return and cause more chaos. This reunion does not end in murder, though, because Adam has no interest in following in his father's evil legacy. He hates his dad and wants nothing to do with the Shi'ar, as another flashback reveals that he did not just leave his home planet because of his powers, he left because Deken's loyalists came to claim him and ended up slaughtering his entire village in the process, who all gave their lives so that Adam could escape. That means he had quite an axe to grind with Eric the Red, and the entire Summers family teams up to kick his ass. After the bloody battle is over, Adam even gets to briefly reunite with Philip Summers, the man he saved back in the 90s without even knowing that he was his real grandfather. So somehow, that one really good Adam X comic got even better with context. Near the end of the issue, Lilandra gets to meet Adam as well, and recognizing that he is not a threat to her reign, pardons him from any crimes that the Empire might have assigned to his name, at which point he returns to Earth and continues living a mutant life. This was a flashback after all, so it's not like he's going to suddenly start appearing in other things. And if you're wondering why Adam's status as a Summers brother isn't like something that matters at all going forward, it's because also at the end of the comic, everyone gets their memories of this whole incident erased. They kind of try to hand wave it away with something about the Shi'ar politics of the memories being too dangerous to leave around or whatever. I don't know, I will admit that is a little bit contrived, but also, again, this is a flashback book, so they would have to do something like that to explain why this hadn't been referenced for the last 30 years of real-world publication. And honestly, I'm fine with it, because it did allow Nicieza to come back and finish the story, and I do think that's worth at least a little bit of retcon bullshit. Speaking of bullshit, one more lore fact about Adam that I have to add from this issue. If you think that this comic just kind of erased all of his 90s nonsense and made him a more serious character again, no, it is leaving him weird. It confirms that his brain is in his butt. I was actually kind of aware of this fact before I started reading, because I'll usually start my research on the Marvel Wiki, and in the trivia section of this page, it says that Adam is able to survive a gunshot to the head because his brain is in his buttocks, and then, quote, though it is unknown if he was serious or sarcastic. So I kind of expected that to just be a one-off joke. Then I actually read the book, and in the book, he is explaining why he was able to survive a headshot, and it says, plain as day, that his organs are scrambled for tactical purposes, and his brain is literally in one of his ass cheeks. He says the word literally. I don't think he's being sarcastic, he is speaking very clearly here. His brain's in his ass. And I mean, I hate that, it's dumb, but it also is kind of tactical. He was genetically engineered to be the heir to a very volatile throne, which meant that he was supposed to be assassination-proof. He was not supposed to be one-shot. And like, if I asked you all watching, where would you shoot somebody to one-shot kill them, none of you would say ass, so I guess this was a smart move. And with that, the tale of Adam X, the X-Treme, comes to a close. Yes, I did end it on the comment about his brain being in his ass. It felt weirdly appropriate. But yeah, Adam has not been seen in any major capacity since X-Men Legends. He has gotten a couple of background cameos, but nothing remotely important. His entire storyline is weirdly good, better than I was expecting it to be. I mean, in universe, it's absolutely wild, but from a publication standpoint, it's actually pretty awesome to hear about. Nicieza getting to return decades later to finish the story that he was fired from. I love hearing stories like that, and I bet Nicieza was very happy about it too. Adam X remains one of the most edgy, silly 90s men I've ever seen in my life, and his power is still ridiculous. But we are also getting to a point in modern comics where we can more affectionately reference a lot of the stupid stuff that was happening in the 90s. Maybe not all of it. I think we can leave the entire body of Rob Liefeld's work well back there, for example, but Adam X was written with enough genuine story in mind that I kinda do want to see more of him. And I can't believe I'm actually saying that, but yeah, I enjoyed reading his books. The beauty of comic books at the end of the day is that they're all kind of dumb. Dumb in a cool way, but when you really look at most characters, they're all sort of stupid, and the reason they might not seem stupid is just because we're used to it and we enjoy it. Who's to say that we can't have a popular character who is a part of the Summers clan and is also a mutant and also a cosmic space bird with fire powers? I would say that we can have one of those because that describes both Adam X and Phoenix. Maybe it's not that Adam X is a stupid character with stupid powers. Maybe it's more that the X-Men in general, and maybe a lot of superheroes, are stupid characters with stupid powers. But we love them because of the stories around these characters. And the story of Adam X, the X-Treme, has been 30 years in the making. So personally, I hope it doesn't stop here. Thank you all so much for watching. As always, I do hope you enjoyed. This counts as my Cyclops launch day video for Marvel Rivals. I have never promised that I would do a launch day video for every character that Rivals puts out. I have very carefully always promised that I would do a video on all the obscure weirdos that they make, and Cyclops is not an obscure weirdo. There is no reasonable way that I could make a Cyclops deep dive lore video. It would just be too long, and I also have other commitments this month, so there was no way I was going to make that happen. I unfortunately cannot bend my schedule around every single Rivals release. But what I could do is make a Cyclops related video about one very specific aspect of the character, and I chose Adam X, purely because I wanted to, and I think it turned out pretty funny. If you want more videos on very obscure comics weirdos, check out my Patreon. This is the kind of video that usually would have been one of my Patreon exclusives, but as I said, I wanted to do something Cyclops related, and so it went to the main channel. Hopefully it did well. I think the most 90s man in the world is a good enough intro hook, but we'll see. Seriously though, I do have a Patreon. If you check that out, you can find early and ad-free access to all of my videos, as well as a Patreon exclusive video every month. There are 8 hours of exclusive content on there and counting. My username there is the exact same as it is here. There's also a link to that in the description of this video and on my channel page. It's very easy to find, and extra double thank you to the people who already support me over there. It really does help me keep making these videos for you guys. Lastly, shout out to Ruben Perez, the artist I work with for these videos. He drew the poses of the character that you've been watching talk at you for the last 45 minutes or so. Go check out his other work if you have a chance. And now, I'm going to go read some comics from the modern era just for fun, because I have read too many books from the 90s lately, and I think it's starting to have an effect on me. Though as I say that, my next video is going to have me reading books from the early 60s, which are going to be weird and stupid for very different reasons. So, stay tuned for that one, I guess.